Little tutorial about SA2. So don't want you to be freaked out about SA2. As the title says, how free are the American media, right? Did I just say free? How free are the American media? You know, I got up not long ago. It's like until I brush my teeth, I don't enunciate enough. So my apologies for saying, how free are the American media? Like Elmer Fudd. How free are the American media? So there's your hint. This essay is about the media, right? Please don't just regurgitate a bunch of historical information. That's your vehicle. Like, remember in essay 1, your vehicle was the topic that you chose in order to compare what? To compare independent media with mainstream media, right? So in this case, your vehicle is the historical event to analyze how free the American media are in the sense of, you know, do they have vested interests? As I say in my directions, you know, when the U.S. invaded Afghanistan and Iraq initially in the early 2000s. Now, even though 9/11 didn't have anything to do with Iraq or Afghanistan, right? Aside from the fact that Osama bin Laden was supposed to be in a cave in Afghanistan somewhere, turned out that isn't even where they allegedly found him. So, those wars were reported by CNBC and NBC, right? A lot of that coverage. Now, what people didn't know at the time was that those companies, those media corporations, were under the umbrella of General Electric. Remember that show, was it 30 Rock with Tina Fey, right? Well, that was GE, right? And GE ran NBC at that time, right? Remember all the microwave oven stuff they talked about? They popped in there, kind of cute and all that. What they didn't tell you was that General Electric was the third largest weapons contractor on the planet. In some cases, the second. I think it may have moved up a little bit since then. Very, very prolific company when it comes to wars. So now, would that change? Knowing that, would that change how you would interpret the news coverage on CNBC and NBC when Anderson Cooper, who was an intern for the CIA, not that that means anything, doesn't mean he's still working for them, although, hey, you never know. When Anderson Cooper reported on the wars, was his point of view, free and autonomous from the corporate incentives to make a lot of money on war, and how the war would essentially just make General Electric rich, let's be honest, right? So yeah, when you know that, maybe when you watched NBC, if you could go back in your time machine, you would have been a little more skeptical, right? So there's an interesting example of how reportage wasn't really being that democratic, right? In the sense that since people didn't know about the covert corporate interests there on how to make it seem like, oh my gosh, we got to go to war, we got to go to war, we got to go to war, this is terrible, how that was actually tied to some economic incentives on the part of General Electric, which owned NBC and CNBC at 30 Rockefeller Plaza, named after the Rockefeller family, right? So there's an example of how maybe someone will want to write. I mean, John Perkins talks about Iraq, right? There, you could work that into essay 2. However, the easiest, probably the biggest no-brainer in terms of just maybe stress-free, it's all laid out for you there, would be to write about Panama. And I have a little video in discussion 4 about, you know, what you could essentially scoon from discussion 4 and work it into an essay with very little effort in terms of just scrapping for information, because that's a very it was a very simple invasion. It wasn't a war really. It was an occupation invasion. Very brief. Operation Just Cause. And please, if you write on that, don't write Operation Just Because as your title. I mean, most students think that's really original, but over the last couple of years, I probably wrote dozens of titles where that was a title. I never grade down on it because, I mean, you know, in that student's mind, they've invented a really cool wheel there, but they don't realize they're reinventing the same wheel. Kind of like when I had a Great Dane as a kid, and I was like, you know, 10 years old walking my dog, not that tall yet. People would say, hey, you should put a saddle on that horse and ride him, or on that dog and ride him. I literally heard that 100 times. I had to pretend like I was laughing, right? So that is a clever pun, Operation Just Because, for writing on Panama. Please don't use that though, because it's become a bit of a cliche. But so don't forget to read the background information for Essay 2. Then you move into the assignment guidelines, and then there's a bit more after that on the basic requirements. And then don't forget that Thomas Jefferson quote. So Thomas Jefferson, a redhead like myself, I'm not a Thomas Jefferson fanatic or anything, fits in this paper because Thomas Jefferson, as one of our former presidents, one of the early guys, right, had some very interesting opinions on the media. He felt like it was the informal fourth, branch of government, right? And so he called the media the fourth branch of government because it was meant as another way to check and balance the power of the executive, the judicial, and the, what's the other one? Legislative, right? Branches of government. So it makes no difference the fact that I was a redhead. I'm still a redhead to some degree, but there I am as a little kid. And probably by age 12, I read more books than the average American does in a lifetime today. So reading is good. You know, reading really does put you in good stead. It fills your brain like a cistern, like a reservoir of information, right? Different sentence patterns, vocabulary, textures, nuances, all that gets in there into your subconscious mind, and it bubbles up into your conscious mind when you're writing. So a lot of times when people, they get writer's block, it's because they just haven't filled their reservoir with enough data, enough information to draw from. It's like, imagine a computer with barely anything in its memory banks. I mean, it can barely do anything that way, right? So we're so much more complex and noble than computers. So give yourself some credit and do some reading once in a while. Pick up a book, a nonfiction book, or a book for pleasure, and work your way through it in a week. You'd be surprised what you can do in a week or two with a book. It doesn't really matter if you sit and read it for hours and hours at once in one sitting. It's more the daily exposure to the printed word that does it, and holding it in your hand. It just really goes into the mind a lot easier that way, and really kind of takes hold in there, as opposed to reading on a computer screen. You just don't absorb the information as readily that way. So I can't plug reading enough. It's really a great part of the writing process, an overlooked part, and that's why we're reading in here. That's why I'm having you read some stuff from some selections from Perkins, because as opposed to just a textbook with a couple of cheap little essays, that are in all the anthologies. Like, how many times can you read Killing an Elephant by George Orwell? What a bore. I mean, that is just taught over and over and over again, right? And there are tons of essays like that are just, they're regurgitated from anthology to anthology ad infinitum. It's boring, and it's a disservice to you. So I'm trying to give you a little bit of a sense of contiguous, going from one chapter to the next in an account, expose you to some interesting ideas. And John Perkins is not a bad writer either. So that about does it for Essay 2. If you have any questions, definitely do ask. I'm already up past 8 minutes, and all I have to do to say at this point is, as the t-shirt says, question the media. Kirk out.